established educational setting, along with research that uses educational tests will fall under the exempt status. It has to do with what the level of risk. In our case, there was not going to be any physical interaction with the respondents. So what we did, and I will demonstrate that, as we go along, we converted our instrument. This is the survey instrument, and we use Google Forms. So we put it out there online, and we provided the link to those who are interested in doing that. And since then, that is what I've been using for most of my research. I convert my instrument using Google Form. As I said, we demonstrate how do you convert your instrument to Google Form. I think there's a section on survey research. We do that. So exempt means very low risk. It doesn't involve people under 18 years of age. It's taking place in an educational setting. It's using educational tests and stuff like that. And the observation of public behavior and use of existing data is exempt. Sometimes researchers use secondary data. It's not data that they collected firsthand. So the data is already there. There's no harm to subjects and anybody. So you can apply for exempt status, and that's what the second level of review is called expedited. Again, it's based on the level of risk. So this status involves minimal risk of harm to individuals. Research that typically falls under these are research involving data collected due to non-research purposes, such as medical treatments. Sometimes people collect data and use it for a different purpose, or use of voice, video, digital, image data. Sometimes you want to do recording of people and stuff like that. Again, the risk is what? Minimal. Research on individual group behavior, which includes surveys, interview, oral history, focus group, program evaluation, quality assurance, you can apply for expedited. Expedited, depending on the nature of your research instrument, it may take a little over a month, to review and get a response and get the approval, as long as you address all the issues that there is. So that's the second level of review. First is exempt, second is expedited, and the third is full review. Again, is the level of risks involved. So certain populations, because of their status, they are impaired and they cannot provide informed consent. Populations such as prisoners, children under 18, pregnant women, individuals with an inability to provide consent will almost always require a full committee review. It takes time for them to review because they have to ensure, that their rights are fully protected. So again, committee will do an extensive review of the research proposal and often interview the principal investigator for further details. They will interact with you to ask you questions about all aspects of your study. You have to respond to them. The committee have to be very satisfied before they can approve your study. So it's exempt, expedited, and full. This is the three types of review by institutional review boards. In addition to that, they realize that some research doesn't really require any IRB approval, so there are exemptions to that. A number of them, so some of them you just apply, for exemption through the IRB. So they'll give you an exemption. Research in educational settings, again, is always about the level of risk. People collect data for all kinds of educational testing. Like if I want to develop a new test, a TOEFL or GRE or GMAT, these are all educational testing. It doesn't really involve any harm, serious harm. So it's always exempt. You can always apply for it. Documentary research. I want to do documentary, the document about people's way of lives and all that. Harm level is very, very low. It's very, very minimal. So you apply for exemption. Generally, interviews, doing surveys or interviews, observing people, and stuff like that, depending on the level of risk, you can apply for exemption, using existing data, which is documents or what we call content analysis. You want to visit published information. Those are very minimal risks. You apply for exemptions, and stuff like that. Any questions on what we covered before we talk about the specific IRB or specific ethical issues? There are about 6 or 7 core ones. Okay, somebody's asking the site that they just logged in. This is the CITIprogram.org. Or you can just Google CITI, in Google, it will show up. Okay. All right, let's quickly talk about the key ethical issues, and then we can then open it out for your questions and answers and all that. Okay, so quickly, what are the key, all these are from the Nuremberg Code, they are from the Declaration of Helsinki, they are from the 1948, human rights. They are all documents, from the U.S. Public Health Service. They talk about the same thing. The first one is informed consent. Second one is anonymity, meaning that if you're a researcher, you need to ensure that the rights of subjects are protected, through all this. The third is privacy, physical and mental distress, sponsored research, fraud and scientific misconduct, dealing with vulnerable populations. Okay, very key one. So here, just a short activity. What is informed consent? Kindly explain the process of obtaining informed consent for your research subjects. Let's have a short discussion about this. And also, we say, okay, these are ethical principles we need to respect. And we say the first is informed consent. So what is informed consent, and how do you obtain informed consent? I mean, most of you have, have ongoing projects, you have published articles, and you've gone through the process. So how did you ensure informed consent? So that's a question I'm asking. You can put it in the chat, you can raise your hand to describe the process and all that. Now we take it from there. There are a number of ethical principles we need to respect, and we're saying that one of them is informed consent. What is informed consent, and how do we obtain informed consent? So that's the question. So just share your experience with us. I know there's something in the chat saying, thank you, Prof, for the useful thoughts on the exercise. What will be your views on research covering a rare disease with regards to vulnerable population overall goal? Vulnerable populations are always protected, and there are examples where we're going to visit that. It's part of the topics we're going to cover today. How do you deal with a rare disease regarding vulnerable populations? Well, generally, you see, vulnerable populations are vulnerable. It is very difficult for them to give consent. So sometimes they have layers of protection. Somebody will have to act on their behalf. So that is one. The kind of disease will also make a difference. There may be some protocols around it before you can research or you can interview. But again, once you have approval for maybe your IRB, because they'll review that, and they will give you approval based on the way you describe how they're going to collect your data. So generally, I mean, that is how, there are always layers of protection. If they are children, they are classified as vulnerable population because they cannot give consent. If they are in a prison environment, and sometimes even they feel pregnant women are vulnerable. Sometimes they classify them like that, and sometimes that is why actually it goes back to the question I'm asking. How do you obtain informed consent? Okay, informed consent is to seek permission from the would-be respondents and provide relevant information through the process. That is great, but how do you achieve informed consent? Okay, participants usually have to sign a consent form, okay, to participate in a study. It should not be induced nor forced to participate in a study. This is great from Dr. Idrisu. So, if the respondent is less than 18 years, the researcher gets the permission from the parents, okay, or guidance after due explanation of what the research is all about. This is from ABBO, Abutua. That's great. Exactly. People under 18 are classified. Eric hand is up, so Chrissy, you can give him permission.
Eric, kindly unmute and go ahead, please.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Prof. What I know about informed consent is that you issue out a written document to the participants to actually indicate their acceptance to be involved in a study. But I want to know, could there be a word of mouth through maybe the authorities of that institution, perhaps an educational institution, so that they would inform them and then get to you about their willingness to participate in a study? Thank you. Okay,
thanks, Eric. I mean, generally, informed consent, if you look at the responses from Dr. Idrisu and co, it's always a form. And to consent, there has to be an indication. How do we know that you are not coerced if it's verbal? So to a large extent, that is why if you are not in a position to give consent, somebody will ask on your behalf, a parent may sign it. Maybe I'll share one form that I use, I'm currently using, and I'm sure most of you have their own format and all that. Generally, they have to sign if the participants or the respondents of the surface cannot. Then somebody has to act on their behalf. It has to be documented. If you look at some of the earlier examples, you seek informed consent, then you obtain informed consent. How do you obtain that? It's maybe by signing or indicating that, yes, I consent to participation, so that you are not coerced in taking part. So that is that. So generally, it has to be a written document. FASICA is explain. You need to have written document stating about your research, explain the purpose, and describe. You use participant and tell them that it's pure voluntary, and as their willingness. That is true. That is how you obtain informed consent. They have to consent. I know there's a long one from Justice in. After visiting the colleges, I met with the heads of departments and members of the mathematics unit to brief them on the study. I showed them of confidentiality, anonymity, the right to withdraw from the study at any time without any negative consequences. They were also made to understand that participation is voluntary. Therefore, teacher educators who agreed to participate in the study were given an informed consent letter to sign. Yes. So most of the time you have to endorse. And as I say, I share one form with you, which I'm currently using. I'm collecting data right now, on this vaccine hesitancy. This is an international study. I have my colleagues in the US, they're doing the same. We also want to know if the same issue pertains in our part of the world. Because we know in Ghana, for example, we have the vaccine here. I don't know if people are willingly going for it or there's some hesitancy on the part of some population. I had a funny story, several months, maybe 3 months back. I was having a meeting at the palace, and people came wearing masks, and we have the language, and he said, look, here, we are here with the ancestors, so COVID-19 cannot enter the palace, so take off your mask. And that was very interesting. And they started taking off their masks. And I said, no, let them put on their masks, and stuff like that. So it's an ongoing study, and I will share that form. So generally, for informed consent, you need a written, it should not be verbal, because if it's verbal, there's no proof that consent was given voluntarily and stuff like that. Any other views on that? I think it's well explained now. Okay, so let's go back. Let me see if I can actually pull my informed consent letter. Informed consent. Let's see this form. This is always an issue. Let's see. Consent participant. Let me see if I can share this form. This form consent letter. Okay, this is a letter that we sent out some time back for one of our studies. There are several versions of that. This is the old study of the law of can bring informed consent to participate in a research study. So here the project title, and then thank you for everyone that tells you about your participation is voluntary, which we all know. It goes on the primary risks, breaches of privacy, that you may find as a subject. You may skip or not answer any question. If you're comfortable, goes on and on and on and on. Then talks about, the study, principal investigator, co-principal investigator with phone numbers and everything. And in this case, we also give them incentive. Therefore, as a token of appreciation for their participation, we give them, a gift certificate. It's only $10, but, sometimes it makes a big difference. I have another version. Let me see if I can find it. If I can find it. Maybe it's not in this folder. Okay, but generally, as I said, then they'll say, if you agree to participate, then please endorse this form. And then you send the form out, and things like that. So that is how it stands. All right. So that is well understood. Let's continue to move to the other aspects of the process. So we talked about informed consent. So telling potential research participants about all aspects of the research that might reasonably influence their decision to participate. Participants must be aware that they are participating in a study, must be informed of all the consequences, and must consent. How do they consent? Is by signing. Okay, so it's very often people are asked to sign a consent form, which we have all demonstrated, which describe the elements of the research that might influence a person's decision to participate. So that is one key ethical issues. The other one is for anonymity. Anonymity. What is anonymity? When we say a response is considered anonymous when the researcher cannot identify a given response with a given respondent. When we send out survey forms, for example, you don't need their names. They fill the instrument or the questionnaire, and then it's aggregate data. You put all of them together. So that one is anonymous. Or for those who teach, at the end of the semester, what happens? The students will have to evaluate you, right? So they have this evaluation form. So they fill out this evaluation form, and then they don't write their names on the form. Okay, so that form is an anonymous form. Okay, so that is how you ensure what anonymity. Okay, so that's how it goes. Okay, so a response is considered anonymous when the researcher cannot identify a given response with what a given respondents. Okay, so all this aggregate data, you don't write their names, you don't ask them for their phone numbers, and then it's anonymous. Okay, so it means that an interview survey respondent can never be considered anonymous since an interviewer collects the information from identified respondent. That's what it means. That is the other key ethical issue that we need to consider. So the first was informed consent. The second is what? An anonymity. Okay, and then this is additional explanation. We don't have to go through all that. The next one is confidentiality. When we say something is confidential, what do we mean by that? Confidential means a researcher is able to identify a given person's response, but essentially promises not to do so publicly. Like we go to see our doctors, right? You see your doctor has all your medical information, but your doctor promises that I'm not going to share this information with anybody. So that is confidential. So confidential what? Information. So that's the notion of confidentiality. Sometimes people confuse anonymity with confidentiality, but they are different. Confidentiality deals with information sharing. I know A said this, but I promise I'm not going to share that information with anybody. That is confidentiality. Okay, anonymity means you cannot link a given response to a given respondent. So there are two different issues. So always remember the difference between anonymity and confidentiality. So that's the third ethical issue to be addressed. All right, these are just additional explanation, Then closely related is the notion of privacy. Privacy refers to ability to control when and what conditions others will have access to your belief, values, or behavior. Earlier on, I used the example of Lord Humphrey. But Humphrey was a sociologist. He was interested in gay and lesbian issues. He went to a public place, where gay and lesbians were practicing their act. He played the role of a watch queen, and he collected what? He wrote down their number plates, and then later he followed up and then went to their homes. This is a violation of their privacy. So that is the ability to control when and under what conditions others will have access to your belief, values, or behavior. So that is the fourth issue that we've addressed. Chrissy or Erin? We have 2 hands up. Erin, are you there? Chrissy, are you there? Hello? I don't know if I have the.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Prof. One of the cases of fraud, or as we call it here, academic fraud, I have noticed or have read about is plagiarism. It's very common. We also have cases of senior researchers or professors publishing the works of their graduate students as their own without consent, without acknowledgement whatsoever. These are some of the cases we have seen. And of course, cooking up data, especially with questionnaires, research instruments, a lot of manipulations to suit the conclusions the researchers want to reach. These are some that I know.
Okay, that's great, Emmanuel. So it's outlined, sometimes people using other people's data without, approval, and stuff like it has led to all kinds of issues, and things like that. Dr. Abiodun, you can also provide your views. I think you can unmute us. Go ahead, Doctor.
Thank you, Professor, for those seasoned instruction. I really enjoyed it. I want to look at fraud in research from the perspective of research process compromise instead of total validation of research instruments. One just pick the instrument. Probably somebody has used it somewhere before. Probably somebody have given it psychometric property before. You just pick the instrument and collect your data, and the data you did not revalidate irrespective of your environmental differences. It can constitute a fraud to the research process. Then data falsification. Data falsification. When you collect your data, probably you have a very laborious kind of descriptive survey to undertake. You have to sample. You have sampled something like 1,000 respondents, and instead of getting all your data from the 1,000, you now just get from 500, and you are now presenting results for 1,000. That's tantamount to fraud in research process. I also look at result misrepresentation. You have your own particular feased result you want to get. There was a day one of my Oga did an analysis. It is the researcher was preempting that the experimental treatment she used for her PhD thesis will make meaningful, significant impacts on the dependent measures. But having gotten the result out, my Oga gave the result to the researcher, and the researcher looked at the effect of the treatment. It is not significant. They will not take this in my post presentation. My Oga said, that is your result analysis. Invariably, the researcher didn't want to take the result and said the Oga will change it. My Oga insisted that he will not change it, and that he will monitor that the report she's going to write must reflect that the treatment has no significant influence. So the result misrepresentation is tantamount to fraud in research along others.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot, Doc, for all the practical examples and first-hand example, which is an issue of fraud, in research. I see there are a bunch of chat messages. Let's read some of them. One can even plagiarism herself, which happens sometimes too if you don't acknowledge you know, the source.
Or I can go through with the
yeah,
chat.
go through, exactly.
Yeah. All right. So I'll start from the very top. You have
Okay.
very interesting one. So Dr. Bariham, he said fraud in research means false manipulation of scientific data to obtain a common conclusion. Plagiarism is another dimension of fraud in research. Bayo also said using wrong statistics to cover up the true situation. Julia also said fabrication of data so as to meet the perceived outcomes. And Daniel is saying violation of ethical conduct, example, not seeking for express informed consent of participants. Joram is saying unacceptable manipulation of data to suit a perspective is fraud. Bio is saying armchair research. Mumani is saying funded research are limited to terms of reference, do not accept negative aspects of the findings, fail to publish and finding, hence cannot sort out the issues. Christopher is saying fraud could be an aspect of obtaining data without permission with some malicious intents to gain financial benefit. Ngozi is saying research fraud could be in the aspect of falsification of data, manipulation of data, and wrong representation of data. Abaka is saying fraud in respect of research is plagiarism in disguise. And somebody saying one can even plagiarize him or herself. Dr. Bariham is also saying again that it also covers false interpretation of data, not going to the field for data, but self-administrating the questionnaires, etc. Yewi is saying your supervisor publishing your master thesis and making you a second author or you just saw online. Prof, is that fraud? And the last one, which Chuku is saying fraud is stealing someone's intellectual property without reference.
Yeah, thanks.
So these are some of the comments in the chat. Thank you.
Okay, that is great. That is great. Yeah, and all these examples of fraud and scientific misconduct. Yahweh is saying that, how can your supervisor take your master's thesis and make you, the second author? That's definitely, fraud, and scientific misconduct and plagiarism, because it doesn't belong to your supervisor. It belongs to you. I know sometimes it may happen, but that is very sad. Because you can always work with your students you supervise to publish, or sometimes they can even add you to, to the list of authors if if they are pleased with your supervision, but they'll even inform you. But there's no way you can flip the whole thing around, that your supervisor will put his or her name as a primary author and you as a secondary. It's totally unacceptable. It's a case of fraud, scientific misconduct, and plagiarism as well. I know Titilayo's hand is up. So
yes, please unmute and then go on, Titilayo.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I think it was an error. I'll just try to my screen. It was an error. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Thanks. All right. Let's quickly share. Let me see where we are, and then we can open the floor for Q&A. Because as I said, it's a bunch of slides. There's no way we're going to go through all of them, but it's all talks about examples of ethical issues, fraud and scientific misconduct. Again, you've all explained that, so there's no point to go through this. Deliberate falsification, misrepresentation, or plagiarism of data, findings, or the ideas of others. This is a definition by Monet and Sullivan. It is not yours, so deliberate falsification, misrepresentation, or plagiarism of data, findings, or ideas of others. It's a bunch of stuff. Reporting that has not been conducted. I think Dr. Idrusu, one of you mentioned that. I remember those days when we were undergrad students, we were working as research assistants. So, you go out there, you sit under a palm, one typist place, and then you fill out the questionnaire yourself instead of giving it to respondents. That is fraud, because the data is not coming from its intended source, and things like that. Okay, so remember the second part of the question asks, how do we deal with that? How do we reduce that? There are a number of mechanisms. These are just some examples. Peer review. Sometimes if you're like the example that the doctor shared, they reviewed it and then, there were a divided opinion on that. So peer review, that is why anytime you send an article for publication, it's reviewed by your peers. And then they'll comment, and based on their comments, they'll reject your article, you modify it, substantial modification or minor modification. You go through a process before it is published. Replication is another option. If people have doubts, they will try to replicate, the supervision of novices. When people start their career, they need guidance. The fact that you have a PhD does not mean that you know everything. So some schools, they have a mentor program where they pair junior faculty with senior faculty, and for senior faculty to mentor, the junior faculty, show them. Because sometimes by the time people even finish, they haven't even published a single article. So even the process of publication is an issue for them. So supervision of novices is one approach. Monitor over productive researchers is also a way to at least check that. Sometimes people will take the same data and manipulate it in several different, they segment it, send it to different journals and things like that. So sometimes there's a way to monitor that. Require more complete data. Submission, sometimes the kind of data that people submit is inadequate, so there's a way to monitor. Report suspected cases. Sometimes so people do that, when they have doubts about the publication and stuff. Establish standards and retain data. All these are examples, ways to, to deal with some of this. Fraud and scientific misconduct are closely related. But misconduct is broader. It's a broader concept. It also includes fraud and carelessness or bias in recording and reporting data, mishandling data, and incomplete reporting of data. So that is a broader concept than fraud, scientific misconduct. And sometimes there are consequences. Sometimes people even strip, people's degrees when they realize that the information they used was falsified and things like that. Their requirement is honesty and openness, especially when it comes to publications and things like that. Let me stop here. This is another activity. Deception, when and why is deception used in research? Sometimes it's a tool used in research and people are deceived, and after that, there's what they call debriefing. They debrief them, tell them about the right intentions of research. Why is deception, when is it used, why is it used, and things like that. But we only have less than 20 minutes. I want us to be able to have a Q&A section. We're going to do that the last 30 minutes, but it's been a very interesting discussion. So we have less than 20 minutes. So let's open it up. I see some few messages. Maybe Aaron can read those things and we'll try to react to this in the chat.
Yes, okay. The conversation is open. If you want to ask a question or make a comment, please raise your hands. We'll allow you to talk. But Prof, there are 3 comments and I would want to read. So Nyemichi is saying, Prof, thanks for the insight in your well-guided discussion. There are several conflicting research which involves researchers, institutions, funders, etc. Could you provide some clarity on this scenario? If a postgraduate candidate graduates with a degree and leaves an institution without publishing data, who owns the right to publish? The institution, student, or supervisor?
Okay. Well, this has to do with intellectual property. Each institution has its own guidelines. This is the Office of Research. They have their own rules. Generally, there's no right or wrong answer here. Sometimes people feel that if they paid for your work, then whatever you produce belongs to them. It's not cast in stone, but it's a policy of some institutions. Others feel that it all has to do with intellectual property guidelines for that particular institution. Some will say you are paid for your work, so whatever you produce belongs to that institution. Others will have a more flexible approach. I collected the data, I analyzed the data. Even though, yes, I have a supervisor, remember the person is a supervisor. You are the best authority on the subject. 2 weeks ago, my daughter defended her proposal. Of course, before that, we did a dry run. He presented before me, and I commented and all that. And I said, look, whatever your supervisors say, let them know that it is your work. Their role is to supervise and provide guidance. And some asked very tough questions, and she did very well. And she said that this is where my focus is going. Yes, what you said is relevant, but currently that is not my focus. My focus is this area, and I'm going to collect data in this area, and I'm going to publish and write in this area. You are the authority. It's not your supervisor. Your supervisors are there to guide you. And if you are not ready, they will not ask you to defend. They should have your best interest. So who owns the data depends on the institution policy, based on intellectual property policy of that particular institution. Some will say it's paid for by the institution, so it belongs to the institution. Others are more flexible, on that. So there's no one answer. It depends on the institutional property, policy of the institution. So that's that for Oyimachi. Okay.
Yeah. So Dr. Bariham is saying, excellent presentation, Prof. We are grateful. And Joram is saying, is data massage fraud, that is making data look nice through percentages, when in real sense, the sample may not be adequate.
Yeah, definitely, this is fraud. Why do you massage your data? I remember there was a company in the US called Enron. It's a giant company, presented some statistics that they're doing very, very well, but not knowing that they were massaging their data. A company collapsed. Definitely that was deception. They deceive people who have put in their lifetime investment in the company. So definitely you cannot massage data. That is fraud. That is definitely fraud and scientific misconduct. Okay. Any other questions, comments?
No, not really question, but Emmanuel is saying that during his undergraduate study, his HOD trained some of them on research methods and how he made them do it, kindle his love for research. Okay, so Ade Rinsola is saying, thank you, Prof. We have one hand up, but I'll read this and then we'll take the hand. He said, to avoid the scientific misconduct, if the student is working in a part of supervisor research projects, it should be stated clearly that the thesis for the student as well as the co-authorship. And Adirin Sula is saying that Prof, you need your email or WhatsApp number. So maybe, Prof, we can put that in the chat.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Yes. You can share. That's okay.
Yeah, that's okay. And then so Eric, I've asked you. Oh, sorry, Eric. Let me go to Eric again. So Eric, please unmute and then go ahead. Eric Atari, go ahead.
All right, Prof. Thank you for your presentation. I want to clarify something. For example, if you are in an institution, perhaps you are a faculty member, and then there's this issue of, let's say, lecturers not actually teaching well, and then you do conduct a study to assess students' perception about how faculty members or limited lecturers are going about their teaching. What are the consequences of your studies if it is published? Because in my view, it may have some consequences. Is there a need to consult before you do the publication, or how do you go about that? Thank you very much.
Well, I mean, generally, that is a research interest. And then if the faculty are willing to respond to your questionnaire and you analyze your data, definitely certain patterns will emerge and you publish it. This is factual information about how faculty are teaching at the institution. So I don't generally think that there should be any, and definitely this is aggregate data. I'm not going to say, unless it's a qualitative research study where you pick from what a faculty will say and produce it in your publication. But if it's quantitative, it's aggregate data. So you are not going to say faculty A is a very, very bad teacher, and this and that and that. No, it's an aggregate, it's trend. Generally speaking, maybe 60%, the respondents are saying they teach very well, or they don't teach well, or they lack the tools in teaching and things like that. Why do we do evaluation? Evaluation is a guide, for faculty to help them improve upon, teaching. I always encourage my students, to be very objective with their evaluation, because there are various approaches to teaching, as we know. Some people like to lecture for long hours. Others would like to pose activities like what I'm doing, because we also want to learn from you as well. Others will use more videos. I do a lot of quizzes, quizzes. There are a bunch of tools, that you can use. Socrative is one, Kahoot is another. And I use all that, in my class. And evaluation students say they want more quizzes, because the quizzes will really point them to, where they have limitations and things like that. So evaluation should be a good tool. So publication of that nature should really help faculty. It should not penalize them, because our styles are different. Some people are seasoned teachers, they've taught over the years, they've learned a lot, they are master teachers. Others are at the beginning stage of the process, they have some limitations. So the publication should actually help them, be a great guide to improve upon the way they teach. It should not be a tool to penalize, and people should not feel bad, because it's aggregate data, percentages and things like that. And as a head of department or a dean or a provost, you should actually take that findings, have a meeting and say, well, this is the balance sheet. What do we do about it? Sometimes maybe it's because of lack of tools. If students don't do well, is it because students did not study, or because the lecturer didn't teach well? You have to find out, so this is our balance sheet. What do we do? Is it because you lack the teaching tools? Or what can we do as an institution to help improve upon teaching so that you get a better evaluation? So I don't think, the faculty should react at all, because that's objective data that you are providing. So that is my opinion on that anyway. I see there's a hand up as well.
Prince, kindly go ahead, unmute and go ahead. Prince.
Thank you very much, Prof, for the opportunity. My addition, just a minor one to the last person that questioned on the efficiency of a particular member of staff in the service. If such publication is going to have any negative effect on the researcher. Well, I have an instance in my university. I am of Federal University of Tueke, Bayelsa State. There was this colleague of mine that carried out a research on how efficient and committed sabbatical staff and adjuncts are to their work in the university. This article was presented in a conference, and when this article was supposed to be published, the organizers of the conference summoned this particular researcher for caution. In the first instance, they told him his article will not be published because it is not publishable. And the researcher asked, why is it not publishable? They said, well, in the context of our Nigerian universities, for now, he may succeed in writing this article freely. If he takes it to an international publishing firm, they will publish it quite all right. But in the future, when it is time for him to be assessed as a professor, upon seeing that publication that he was writing against professors, then in his early days, how committed they are on their sabbatical assignment, that they may use it against him and he will not become a professor in record time. So that publication, that article was dropped. This friend took that same article and went to an international publishing firm and published the article, and it was accepted straight away. So somehow the effect, it may not have an immediate penalty, but in the context of our Nigerian universities, in the future, perhaps it could, going by the example that I just cited. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Okay, well, thanks a lot for sharing. You know, the question that came to my mind is, what is the essence of academic freedom? After going to school for all these years, if you cannot really state what is on your mind for fear of repercussion in the future, then that is sad. You know, that is very sad. So I know it happens, yes. You know, nobody wants bad news, you know, to be published about an institution or an individual. But, you know, this is facts. And sometimes that explains why sometimes, even when it comes to our development, we are stuck. Because when people are trying to be creative and innovative, you know, there are people who are trying to pull that person down, you know, because of their own personal interest, and which is very sad, you know. And that is why it's international, they publish it, because I didn't see anything wrong with that. You know, this is facts. That's the outcome of the research. But because of the impact or the implication of the publication at home, and for maybe future promotion issues and things like that, you know, they couldn't publish it, you know. So it's an issue with academic freedom. You cannot speak your mind. So why did you go to school for all these years? You know, and spend money and time and things like that. You know, that is how I view it too. Okay. Any other, you know, we just have some few minutes left. What time do we have? I think we have about 4 minutes to go.
Yes, Prof. I think that we can wrap up here, but Faith is saying that, Prof, can a research work be published in more than one journal? I think that would be the last one, and then we can go.
Well, generally, people would not accept that. You know, publication should be original. You cannot publish the same work in 2 different journals. And these days, it's very easy to find that. I mean, recently, I wrote an article with a colleague, and then our goal was to publish it in a peer-reviewed journal. You know, he's a Ghanaian, and he wanted to publish it, you know, in some of the local newspapers, which he did. You know, before I realized it was out there. At that time, I was not even aware. So I sent the same article to this journal, and then they cited the source that it has already been published, you know, in one of the leading newspapers. So it's no longer original, you know, so we drop it. You know, so most journals will not accept that. It has to be original. And there's even a statement. They will say that, you know, to submit an article, it has to be original. It has to be, you know, it has not been published anywhere else. So most journals will not accept that. You know, sometimes people will ask you for a book chapter, you know, but you can state that this article has originally been published here so that they know it's not original publication. So generally, that is how it goes.
All right, thank you, Prof. So, Prof, any final remarks, and then we'll conclude for today. Thank you.
Well, generally, as you know, we couldn't go over all the slides. There's always a bunch of slides. I always want to take my time, and as I said, I'm preaching to the converted, so find time to review, especially there are a bunch of short videos. But for some reason, you know, sharing directly linked to YouTube doesn't really work unless it becomes an independent video. But that takes a while. But in your own private time, you can look at those videos as well. There's only a bunch of slides that we couldn't review. Just find time to review. We still have one outstanding issue about whether Saturday or Monday. So maybe tomorrow we can just design a pool. That one is objective data. You know, it's difficult to count.
Yeah, we'll do a poll for that. Yeah.
And that one, the percentages will show. So the majority reigns. So we do that. I think that is all I have for today. I thank all of you for joining us today. And tomorrow we move on to another topic. You know, we combining two topics. Tomorrow we take it slow, more participatory. Chances are that we may not be able to cover, you know, all the slides, you know, but you have access to it. So later on, you can review it for your own consumption. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. It has been one of the most interactive sessions, and I think that our participants would really appreciate the sessions that we've had from Monday. And so, as Kwesi said, and when we are sending the information for us to join, we would add the payment system for certificate, and so we will get that. Kwesi would also attach the presentations that Prof has sent us, and then the videos will be uploaded by the end of the session. So Monday, I'm sure when we do the last one, we'll upload all of it, and then we'll share the link with you on SharePoint so that everyone would have access to it. And so on behalf of the Secretary General of the AAU, would want to thank you, especially Prof, for today's session. It was a remarkable one. I think that has really stuck with us, and then we'll try to do the best of researchers, having in mind all the ethical issues that comes with it, and then our participants for staying on for so long, 3 hours. It has really been a long ride, but we are done. And so I don't know if Kwesi is on. No, I think Kwesi is gone off. I think that will be that for today. Do take care and have a pleasant evening. We'll see you same time tomorrow. Bye for now.